you made it to module 2. I'm just going to jump right in because we have a lot to go over, all right? So let's go ahead and do that now. So we're going to address in module 2, very important lesson today on income statement essentials, all right? So let's do this. What if your financial report um, isn't as hard as you think it is? All right. So I know everybody gets a little nervous whenever we start going over this piece, but you know, I've managed over $300 million budgets in the public, so it's documented. Led Fortune 500 strategies, and I've taught hundreds of leaders how to read financials with confidence. So here's the truth: the income statement tells the story. All right. So once you learn how to read one, you'll never forget it. All right. So we're going to hop right in as to what this means for you today. And the first lesson is that you'll master the language in plain English. All right. You'll be able to spot red flags instantly, and you'll be able to ask questions of your CFOs and their board, and they'll be very impressed by that, right? You'll be able to make real world decisions and looking at the profit and loss statements. So think about your income statement or your profit and loss statement as a movie, all right? Not a photo, because it shows you the money flowing through the organization over time. All right. So you got to ask 3 simple questions. How much came in, which is the revenue? How much went out, which is the expense? And then what's left? And that's the net income. So the story tells the performance over time, right? So it'll show you in a monthly, quarterly, or annual view. And then, of course, this income statement asks you, are we sustainable? Okay. Now, in reviewing the revenue, expenses, and the net income, let's use a real nonprofit and loss statement. Okay. So let's assume the revenue is about $550,000 total. The expenses are 540,000 total, and the net income is about $10,000 surplus. Okay. So now you're able to see the bottom line is really the least important number here. The real insights hide behind the patterns, the percentages, and the relationships between the numbers. Okay. So you'll be able to read the statement like a leader. Okay. So the revenue composition tells that strategic story. You got to look at those patterns. You got to look at those percentages. You have to look at those relationships. So for each sector, of course, there are folks that are joining us from business sector, the nonprofit sector, or the church and ministry sector. And these are all sectors that I've excelled in, which is why it's important that you're here today. Okay. So let's look at another example from the perspective of a grant. Okay. So let's look at Hope's grant in the amount of $250,000. Okay. 45% is the total revenue. So that's nearly half of one source type, which is a red flag. That's a warning. That means you're reading this, you're like, uh-oh, red flag. Half of your income is in a grant form. So that's a huge red flag. All right. So the professional question as a leader that you need to ask is, what happens if we lose the grant? That's an obvious question, but it's a brilliant question because you're seeing this red flag, right? Now, the rule that we need to be following is called the diversification rule. No single source should exceed 40%. I'm going to say that again. No single source should exceed 40%. If it does, that means warning, warning, red flag. All right. You need to start asking questions. So you compare those donations over the 3 months. All right. So you'll be able to see what's happening here. Right. So you look at January, it says 42,000, February, 45,000. And that's going back to, um, here we go. Here we go. Okay. So we're looking at the Hope Community Center. We're going back to look at this budget here. So now you're able to look at the grants and look and see the percentages of what is happening here. So the grants are 45%, the donations are 33, the programs are 8%, and the events are about 14% of this budget. So now you have to ask, why is the 14% growing? What campaign worked? Okay. And you need to be able to dissect and understand what's going on in terms of the vulnerability, and have multiple sources of income and breaking up that budget and understanding what the expenses are. So again, no single source should exceed the 40%. Okay. So the program expenses divided by the total expenses, and you multiply that by 100, that's 58%. All right. So if it was at 75%, that's excellent. If it's between 65 and 75%, that's good. All right. If it's between 55 and 65%, it is an acceptable ratio. So that's where hope is. So it's acceptable. Now, if it was below 55%, you really would need to be concerned about what's happening here. So the leadership question that you need to be asking at this point is, how can we improve efficiency without cutting the mission's impact? All right. So you're looking at Hope Community Center here. There's a surplus of about 10,000 on the $550,000 revenue. All right. So remember, the net margin is about 10,000. Okay. And you'll divide that by the 550,000 K, which leaves you with 1.8%. Now, the warning is that this is a thin margin, okay? So the organization is absolutely running without any cushion at all. So that's a thin margin here. In the healthier margin targets, your business needs to be operating between 10 to 20%. You have the nonprofits that need to be operating between 5 to 10% with a cushion. And then, of course, churches need to be operating with a 3 to 8% cushion, ensuring that you have a place to fall in case things happen, fall into situation. Now, Hope Center in this whole thing is way below the target here. Okay. So this is critical. In terms of nonprofits, restricted versus unrestricted funds. While you may show a 10% surplus, but if the 50K of the revenue was restricted for specific programming, you don't actually have any flexibility at all. All right. You can't use restricted funds as part of creating that cushion. So the leadership question here that we need to be asking, how much surplus is unrestricted if you're in a nonprofit sector? All right. So again, how do we define these terms? The unrestricted means you can use these funds freely. You can deploy them any way you need to organizationally. But if you're operating with a grant, it's probably restricted, and it's only to be used for a specific use. Or a donor may give a specific use for a donation, and they cannot pay general expenses. So that insight is going to be critical if you're running a nonprofit organization. All right. So here are some questions that make CFOs respect you. Okay. So you have the first question. What's our revenue trend over the 3 to 6 months? What is the percentage that comes up out of our top three sources? And then you have expense question examples here. I'm not going to read them all, but one of them is, what's our personnel costs, excuse me, as a percentage of revenue? Which expense categories are growing faster than the revenue? And then, of course, a good strategic question you may want to ask your CFO is, what margin are we running, and is it sustainable? Okay. And then the big question that you always want to know is, if the revenue dropped 20%, what's going to be cut first? Is it the programming? Is it the personnel? That's like a huge question that many companies have to address over time, right? So, of course, some red flags are the revenue declining three three months consecutively, when you have the expenses that are growing faster than your revenue, or your net margin it's shrinking quarter over quarter, and then you may have a single revenue source that's exceeding that 50%. That means you're in a crisis, right? And then you have to look at program efficiency. Is it below the 60% line for nonprofits? So donors don't want to see their money going to overhead. They want to see it going towards that mission. So you got to make sure that you're paying attention, nonprofit leaders. And then, of course, are the fixed costs exceeding 70% of your budget? That means there's no flexibility to adapt uh, the changing conditions there. So, key takeaways. You got the profit and loss statement, your income statement tells the story, folks. It's your movie. And so it's an ongoing thing, it doesn't stop. And number two, you got to focus on that revenue concentration. It creates that the space of vulnerability. You got to zoom in, you have to ask those tough questions. And then number three, those percentages matter more than the dollar amounts, and that's just a fact. And number four, the bottom line isn't everything. You have to watch the patterns that are occurring as you're moving through. And then, of course, number five, good questions, as we've been saying over and over again, make you a great leader. So, for the complete toolkit on this particular lesson, you can feel free to check out the module. Everything that we went over is here. You have a cheat sheet for all the lessons in module 2, but this is lesson 2.1, and there's a cheat sheet for lessons 2.1. So you can feel free to check that out right here. And we're going to get to the next lesson, which is on the balance sheet, your financial health checkup. See you there. Click it. Go ahead and click it. Go ahead. See you there.